On the morning of May 30th, 1431, a 19-year-old girl was led through the streets of Rouen in a white dress. 10,000 people watched. English soldiers lined every rooftop. A bishop read the sentence: heresy, witchcraft, dressing as a man. They tied her to a wooden stake in the middle of the marketplace, piled the wood high enough that the executioner could not reach her to end it quickly, and set it on fire. She screamed one word, over and over, until the smoke took her voice: Jesus. She had led an army. She had crowned a king. She had saved France. And France did nothing to save her. Her name was Joan. She was a peasant, and she changed history before she turned 20. Joan was born around 1412 in Domrémy, a tiny farming village on the edge of Lorraine. Her father was a tenant farmer. Her mother taught her prayers but never taught her to read or write. France in 1425 was a country that barely existed. The English occupied the north. Paris belonged to them. The heir to the French throne, the Dauphin Charles, hid in a crumbling court south of the Loire, too weak and too broke to fight back. And then, in a garden behind her father's house, a 13-year-old girl heard a voice. She saw a light, and the light became St. Michael, then St. Catherine, then St. Margaret. They told her 3 things: go to the Dauphin, lift the Siege of Orléans, crown the king at Reims. Joan told no one, not for 3 years. In 1428, Joan walked to the fortress of Vaucouleurs and asked the garrison commander, Robert de Baudricourt, for an armed escort to the Dauphin. He laughed and sent her home. She came back. And back again. She predicted a French defeat at the Battle of the Herrings, days before the news arrived. Baudricourt stopped laughing. In February 1429, he gave her 6 men, a horse, and men's clothing for the journey. She was 17 years old. They crossed 450 kilometers of enemy territory in 11 days, through Burgundian lands, flooded rivers, and roads patrolled by English soldiers. When she arrived at Chinon, the Dauphin hid among his courtiers to test her. Joan walked straight to him. She had never seen his face. She knelt and said, "God gives you the kingdom of France." The theologians at Poitiers examined her for 3 weeks and found nothing false. The court gave her armor, a banner, and command alongside seasoned captains. She arrived at Orléans in late April 1429. The city had been besieged for 7 months. The English held a ring of fortified bastilles around the walls. Within 4 days, Joan led the French in a series of attacks that shattered the English positions one by one. On May 7th, an arrow struck her above the left breast. She pulled it out herself, retreated briefly, prayed, and returned to the front line that same afternoon. By nightfall, the English garrison of Les Tourelles had fallen. The next morning, the English withdrew. The Siege of Orléans, the turning point of the 100 Years' War, was over. A teenage girl with no military training had done what every French general had failed to do. After Orléans, Joan swept through the Loire Valley. Jargeau fell. Meung fell. Beaugency fell. At Patay, the French cavalry destroyed the English army in open battle. Their worst defeat since Agincourt, reversed in a single afternoon. Joan pressed the Dauphin to march to Reims, the sacred city where every French king had been crowned for 1,000 years. Charles hesitated. His advisors hesitated. Joan did not. On July 17th, 1429, Charles VII was anointed with holy oil in Reims Cathedral. Joan stood beside him, holding her banner. It had borne the burden, she later said, and it deserved the honor. In one summer, a peasant girl from Domrémy had transformed a fugitive prince into the anointed king of France, but her king would not return the favor. After the coronation, everything changed. Charles began negotiating with the Burgundians instead of fighting. Joan attacked Paris in September. A crossbow bolt struck her thigh. Charles ordered the retreat and dissolved her army. For 8 months, Joan fought minor engagements with shrinking forces and no royal support. Then, on May 23, 1430, she rode out of Compiègne to repel a Burgundian assault. The sortie failed. Her troops turned back toward the gates. Joan was the last to retreat, and the drawbridge was raised while she was still outside. The Burgundians pulled her from her horse. Whether it was cowardice, incompetence, or betrayal, no one knows. But the king she had crowned never paid a single coin for her ransom. He never sent a single soldier. He simply let her burn. The English paid 10,000 livres to buy Joan from the Burgundians. They needed her dead, but they needed it to look like God's judgment, not England's revenge. Bishop Pierre Cochon, a French clergyman loyal to England, presided over the trial in Rouen. 70 charges were filed: heresy, witchcraft, blasphemy, wearing men's clothing. Joan had no lawyer. She faced Europe's most educated theologians alone, and answered with a clarity that stunned the courtroom. Asked if she was in God's grace, she replied, "If I am not, may God put me there, and if I am, may God keep me there." They could not break her with questions. So they broke her with fear. She signed a confession she could not read. Days later, she put on men's clothes again, possibly because her guards had stolen her dress, possibly because she refused to deny who she was. It was enough. On May 30th, 1431, they burned her alive. Joan was 19. Her entire military career lasted 14 months. She never killed anyone. She carried her banner, not a sword. 25 years later, the same church that condemned her declared the trial a fraud, and Joan innocent. The 100 Years' War ended in 1453. France won. The country Joan had fought for survived, because a teenage girl from a village no one had heard of believed a voice only she could hear. In 1920, the Catholic Church made her a saint. Today, she is the patron saint of France, a symbol of courage in every country and every century. Empires have fallen, dynasties have vanished, but the girl who heard voices in a garden, who rode 450 kilometers through enemy territory at 17, who stood in the fire at 19, she endures. Because some stories refuse to die,